I'm delighted to bring Dr. Anita Lowe Taylor up with me. Please welcome her.
Thank you. All right, good morning. My name is Anita Lowe Taylor, and I'm a third-year resident at Stanford. And my talk's called The Top of the World to the End of the Line. So I was about 13 years old when we first installed double handrails on our basement stairs. I barely noticed this tiny change, but for my Uncle Jeff, who lived with us, it made the difference between independence and imprisonment. And that's because my uncle had ALS. Though only a child, I was permanently impacted by watching a man who was once a world-class climber be confined to a wheelchair, eventually losing even the ability to speak. As Jeff's body slowly shut down, I grew from middle schooler to resident, and we both learned about the healthcare system, but from dramatically different angles. And that's what I'll talk about a bit today. But to understand a little bit more about Jeff and his approach to life and illness, you need to know a little bit about his background. It's pretty average. One of 8 children, they had your typical family pets. This is actually my dad with their first wolf. It's a true wolf, skiing. That's their second wolf, also named Lowe. That's Bruno the bear, who they actually would walk on a leash out behind their Ogden, Utah home, scare the neighbors when they realized that it was not a dog. And that in the lower left is Prairie the coyote, who I think is bigger than my dad in that photo. At various times, I had everything from a 7-foot caiman to mountain lions to a porcupine, all part of their very extended and diverse family. And then, of course, they had your typical family outings. That's my grandpa with the oldest 3 boys. I think that might actually be on the Grand Teton, but I'm not entirely sure. And this is them on the left there testing out one of the earliest versions of a portaledge. They had hand sewn it in their basement, so I'm not sure I would have trusted it as much as they are there. So with that upbringing, it should come as no surprise that Jeff grew into a pretty ordinary guy. At the age of 7, he became the youngest person at the time to summit the Grand Teton in Wyoming. And over the course of his climbing career, he put up over 1,000 first ascents all over the world. In fact, he once calculated how long he'd spent bivouacked, which means literally strapped to the face of a cliff overnight throughout his life, and it added up to over 3 years, which is like a residency. At the age of 27, he landed on the cover of Sports Illustrated for a climb that would blow open the world of modern-day ice climbing. As the Denver Post put it later, he didn't just do things others couldn't, he did things others couldn't imagine. Of course, none of this was easy. This is a quote from Jeff in Rock and Ice in 2017. More than 5 decades of hands grated by cracks, whole body aching from long days of big wall hauling, tiny tents, bivy sacks, and snow caves lashed by hurricane sleet, frozen fingers and toes, migraines and altitude malaise, not knowing what's to come. It doesn't have to be fun to be fun. Then in the year 2000, everything started to change. Jeff was out trail running one day when he suddenly found himself on the ground. Then it happened again. Then his legs started to drag, and he had to start using a cane and then a wheelchair. He still didn't have a diagnosis, and actually never came up with an official diagnosis. Soon he lost the ability to eat or breathe safely, and in with the trach and the peg. The last thing to go was his voice. Jeff's final first ascent, which is how he referred to his undiagnosed neurodegenerative condition, lasted nearly 18 years. And during that time, he went from the top of the world to the end of his lifeline. This is a quote from Jeff about that experience. I had mastered misery, so I was well suited for the last 2 decades of losing balance, coordination, and sense of touch, contorting hands and foot drop, whole body spasms as painful as anything I've ever known, GI tract shutting down, struggling hours each day to clear phlegm and fluid from lungs weakened from atrophying diaphragm muscles, the agony of trying to communicate with paralyzed vocal cords, unable to reach my granddaughter with more than a hug and a kiss. This is cut off, but like I said, it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. During those nearly 2 decades, I grew from middle schooler to medical student to resident, ascending my own very different mountain. I watched as Jeff struggled with a hurried and at times indifferent medical system, even as I found myself as the harried intern, at times unable to fully listen to my patients beneath a mountain of clinical duties. Sometimes tiny details like patients requesting small changes in tube feed rates, often after hours or when you're on call on weekends, drove me unreasonably crazy. But watching Jeff go through his experience, I came to better understand that those tiny details could be of monumental importance to someone who is trapped in their own body and whose nidus of control was so small. Because sometimes a small change in tube feed rate could mean the difference between a good day and a day spent in an agony of stomach spasms. I have to admit though, sometimes Jeff's medical decisions didn't make a ton of sense to me. In a physiatrist's worst nightmare, he eventually decided to start eating food orally again. He predictably suffered hospitalization after hospitalization, the large chocolate chunks suctioned from his trach, giving him away every time. He had made a medical decision that would have frustrated me had my own patients made similar decisions, because by putting their health at risk, they made more work for me. But again, watching Jeff go through his experience, I think I better came to understand that my role as a physiatrist was not to judge, but to guide, because I was not the one who had to live in their body or make their journey. When Jeff's final aspiration event came, he didn't go quickly. He drifted in and out of consciousness for nearly 3 days. As befitted him, he chose to spend the entire time outside in his wheelchair, bivouacked once again under the stars, in the shadow of the mountains he so loved, finding his own way to a summit where none of us could follow, but where all of us will one day go. Jeff expanded my perspective on what medicine means. He showed me that misery does not preclude joy, that grief and happiness are not mutually exclusive, and that it doesn't have to be fun to be fun. He also showed me that while I might not understand the route that my patients choose to take, I can still be there cheering them on to the top. I'll end in his words. After he died, his daughter found this message painstakingly typed out on his iPad. Years after he'd lost the ability to speak, it was the last thing he would ever write. I know, bit by bit, a little more about that narrowing perspective. It's not all bad. We only have need for words in this world. As energy, we are not separate, but a part of all. So we know all, except when we have mortal shells. Life and death are both great gifts. My perspective is narrowing here, expanding over there. So now I have to go. Thank you.